but the studio did not want me. They tried everything to really keep me from being in the film because they felt that and they were right, that I was not of an equal stature to Paul Newman.
For decades, two names stood like twin pillars in Hollywood: Robert Redford and Paul Newman. They weren't just co-stars, they became symbols of friendship, artistry, and rebellion against the Hollywood machine. Now, at the age of 89, Robert Redford is finally opening up with raw honesty about his bond with Newman. It's a story of loyalty, rivalry, laughter, and loss. And it begins long before the world ever saw them ride together on screen. Roots of a Rebel. Robert Redford's story began in 1936 in Santa Monica, California, where the glamour of Hollywood glittered just over the hills but felt impossibly far away. His father, Charles Redford Sr., was a working-class man, a milkman who later became an accountant and then a chemist. His mother, Martha Hart, was creative, a dreamer with artistic flair. The household was modest, disciplined, and grounded, but young Robert was restless. The streets of Los Angeles in the 1940s shaped him. He spent hours sketching on sidewalks, escaping into drawings of landscapes, baseball heroes, and imagined futures. He later admitted he often felt like an outsider, too creative for the rigid molds expected of him. School was a struggle. He had talent, but not direction. When his mother died unexpectedly while still in her early 40s, the loss carved something permanent into Redford. He was just 18, and grief drove him both inward and outward. He drifted, hitchhiking across the country, drinking too much, spending nights under strange roofs. He found work painting signs and digging ditches, but something inside whispered he was meant for more. That more first pointed him toward art. He attended the University of Colorado, initially studying architecture, but he floundered, dropped out, and spent a season in Europe, wandering France and Spain, painting and absorbing the bohemian lifestyle. In Paris cafes, he discovered the thrill of storytelling, conversations that rolled on for hours, filled with artists and dreamers. Yet painting alone would not hold him. Something about performance called louder. By the late 1950s, Redford found himself in New York City. Broke but determined, he enrolled at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. The shy California boy with sandy blonde hair began to emerge as an actor. Television spots followed. A small role here, a guest appearance there. His sharp cheekbones and magnetic eyes got him noticed. But it was his quiet intensity that made directors look twice. Yet destiny works in twos, and while Redford was struggling to find his voice, another young man across the industry was already building his legend. Their paths would collide in ways neither could have predicted. Newman before Redford. Paul Leonard Newman was nearly a decade older. Born in 1925 in Ohio, he served in the Navy during World War II before turning to theater. Newman trained at Yale and the Actors Studio, honing a craft that would make him one of the finest performers of his generation. By the mid-1950s, Newman was the face of a new kind of masculinity. He wasn't polished like Cary Grant or stern like John Wayne. He was raw, brooding, with a streak of rebellion. Films like Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and The Hustler cemented his reputation. Women adored him. Men respected him. Critics recognized him as an actor who brought truth to every frame. Newman was already an institution when Redford was still hustling for roles. But the two shared something invisible: a refusal to play the Hollywood game as it was handed to them. Newman detested the superficiality of stardom and used his clout for causes he cared about, from civil rights to philanthropy. Redford, meanwhile, would one day build Sundance as a haven for independent filmmakers. At this point, they were strangers orbiting the same industry, two stars not yet in the same constellation. Fate, however, has a way of aligning orbits, and in 1969, it happened with explosive force. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The project seemed risky at the time. A Western, when the genre was fading, built around two outlaws doomed to fail. The film was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Newman was already cast as Butch. The studio wanted a big name for Sundance, someone like Steve McQueen, but deals fell through. Finally, director George Roy Hill suggested a relatively unknown actor, Robert Redford. The studio balked. Who was Redford compared to Newman? Newman himself had doubts, but when the two met, something clicked. Redford's quiet, coiled energy balanced Newman's wry, charismatic looseness. They didn't compete. They complemented. On set in Mexico, the chemistry was undeniable. Scenes that might have been routine crackled with charm. The banter between Butch and Sundance wasn't just acting. It was two men discovering a rhythm that felt natural, like a friendship unfolding in real time. Audiences felt it. When the film premiered, critics praised not just the storytelling, but the partnership. Suddenly, Redford wasn't just an actor, he was Newman's equal. The duo became cultural icons, embodying a new kind of American hero. Flawed, funny, loyal, and rebellious. For Redford, Sundance was life-changing. It gave him both fame and identity. He wasn't just the blonde guy, he was the Sundance Kid. That name would follow him forever, even lending itself to his greatest legacy, the Sundance Institute and Film Festival. Success can bond two men, but it can also breed rivalry. The world now adored them as a pair, and the test was whether that bond could survive the glare of fame. The sting of success. 4 years later, Redford and Newman reunited for The Sting, 1973. This time, the stakes were higher. Both were massive stars. Could lightning strike twice? The film told the story of two con men pulling off an elaborate scheme. Once again, their chemistry carried the narrative. Newman played the seasoned mentor, Redford, the daring apprentice. The energy between them was electric, playful, sharp, almost musical. The Sting became a box office smash and won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Redford himself earned a nomination for Best Actor. For the second time, their collaboration defined a generation of cinema. But behind the success, differences lingered. Newman was already established, comfortable in his role as Hollywood royalty. Redford, meanwhile, was ambitious, restless, unwilling to be boxed into stardom. He wanted to direct, to shape projects, to push beyond acting. Their friendship had to navigate not just fame, but diverging visions of the future. Yet the rivalry never destroyed them. If anything, it sharpened their respect. Newman later joked that working with Redford kept him young, forced him to bring his best. Redford, in turn, admitted that Newman's presence pushed him to levels he might never have reached alone. Brothers in mischief. Fans often assumed Redford and Newman were solemn artists bound by professionalism. In truth, they were pranksters. On the set of Butch Cassidy, Newman once swapped Redford's saddle with one rigged to collapse. Redford retaliated by sneaking hot peppers into Newman's lunch. They teased, they competed, they laughed. What made it work was the absence of ego. Each knew the other's strengths. Newman was the extrovert, cracking jokes, drinking beer, racing cars. Redford was more reserved, reflective, drawn to the quiet of nature and the world of art. Together, they balanced. But beneath the jokes ran something deeper: loyalty. When Newman launched his charity, Newman's Own, Redford supported it wholeheartedly. When Redford began shaping Sundance, Newman encouraged him. They admired each other not just as actors, but as men who used fame for causes larger than themselves. Still, their friendship was not without shadows. Fame is isolating. Both struggled privately. Redford with the pressures of balancing family and career, Newman with the demons of alcohol and the scrutiny of superstardom. In those darker times, they leaned on each other. He was like a brother, Redford later confessed, a statement that carried the weight of decades. Yet brothers, no matter how close, sometimes walk different paths. As the 1980s dawned, Newman and Redford began defining legacies that would cement their status not just as stars, but as legends. Paths of legacy. By the 1980s, both men had nothing left to prove, yet neither slowed down. For Newman, philanthropy became central. He poured profits from Newman's Own into charities, eventually donating hundreds of millions. His camp for children with serious illnesses, the Hole in the Wall Gang, changed countless lives. Newman's cool blue eyes still lit up the screen, but his true passion was giving back. For Redford, legacy took another form: Sundance. In 1980, he founded the Sundance Institute in Utah, creating a platform for independent filmmakers. What began as workshops blossomed into the Sundance Film Festival, the heartbeat of indie cinema. Quentin Tarantino, Steven Soderbergh, and countless others launched careers there. Redford wanted to challenge Hollywood's dominance, to give outsiders a chance, much as he once longed for himself. Their paths diverged, but never split. They remained tethered by respect, by friendship, by history. They had built something few in Hollywood ever achieve: authenticity. Newman's Twilight. By the 1990s, Paul Newman was both an icon and an elder statesman of cinema. His career had spanned decades, from steamy Tennessee Williams dramas to sharp comedies to Oscar-winning turns in The Color of Money. But as he aged, he chose his projects carefully, stepping away from the relentless pace of Hollywood to focus more deeply on racing, philanthropy, and family. Newman's philanthropy became his crown jewel. What had started as a quirky food company, salad dressings and pasta sauces branded Newman's Own, became a juggernaut for good. By the time of his death in 2008, Newman's Own had donated over $300 million to charity. His hole-in-the-wall gang camps gave sick children joy and laughter. He often said he was prouder of that work than of any Oscar or film. Racing remained a passion as well. Even in his 70s, Newman strapped himself into race cars, tearing up tracks with the same ferocity he brought to screen roles. It was part of his character, restless, daring, unwilling to fade quietly. Redford admired this. Though the two did not collaborate on films after The Sting, their lives remained interwoven. Redford later recalled that when they spoke, they rarely talked about Hollywood. They talked about life, about loss, about the world their children would inherit. Theirs was not just a partnership of actors, but of men facing the same passage of time. But time, unrelenting, would bring the hardest chapter of all: the moment when Redford had to face life without Newman. The day the light dimmed. Paul Newman passed away on September 26, 2008, at his farmhouse in Westport, Connecticut, surrounded by family. He was 83 years old. For the world, it was the passing of a legend. For Robert Redford, it was the loss of a brother. Redford admitted later that Newman's death left a hole that could never be filled. "I have lost my friend," he said simply, but the weight in those words was immeasurable. Their friendship had spanned nearly 4 decades, punctuated by laughter, rivalry, and shared purpose. Losing Newman felt like losing a piece of himself. Fans across the globe mourned. News outlets replayed clips from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, showing the two riding together, immortalized in black and white film grain. To audiences, they were forever young, forever running. But for Redford, the memory was sharper, filled not with myth, but with moments. The sound of Newman's laugh, the mischievous glint in his eyes, the quiet solidarity on difficult days. Redford rarely spoke publicly about Newman's passing in the years immediately after. It was too raw, too personal, but his silence spoke volumes. The grief was not for Hollywood to consume. It was his alone. And yet, years later, at the age of 89, Redford finally opened the door, letting the world glimpse the truth about their bond. Redford speaks. Robert Redford, in the twilight of his own life, has always been reflective. By 89, he had seen the industry transform, seen friends rise and fall, seen his own legend cemented. But when asked about Paul Newman, his tone shifted. The guarded man became open. The private star became candid. Paul was the kind of person who made everyone around him better, Redford said. His voice carried both admiration and grief. He remembered Newman not as the icon with piercing blue eyes, but as the friend who offered counsel, who cracked jokes to ease tension, who showed humility when others might have basked in glory. Redford described their professional collaborations as effortless. "We had this unspoken understanding on set," he explained. "They didn't need long conversations to sync performances. A glance, a half smile, and they were in rhythm." He recalled how they challenged each other, not out of rivalry, but out of mutual respect. Each wanted the other to shine. More importantly, Redford emphasized the personal. He was more than a friend. He was like a brother, he admitted. In Hollywood, where relationships often fracture under pressure, theirs endured. They teased, they supported, they gave each other space. And in the end, that unshakable bond was what Redford treasured most. At 89, Redford said Newman's influence still guided him. "Paul taught me that success is measured by kindness, integrity, and the impact you have on people." For a man who had shaped Sundance, launched countless careers, and championed environmental causes, it was a lesson that resonated deeply. But to understand why Redford's words matter so much, we must look at what their partnership symbolized, not just for them, but for all of Hollywood. More than a duo. What Redford and Newman created was more than chemistry. It was myth. Hollywood has seen many partnerships: Laurel and Hardy, Tracy and Hepburn, De Niro and Scorsese. But Redford and Newman stood apart because their bond transcended the screen. They were the cool outlaws of Butch Cassidy, the sly con men of The Sting, but off-screen, they were simply two men who trusted each other completely. That authenticity bled into their work. Audiences sensed it, felt it, and embraced it. Together, they challenged stereotypes of masculinity in cinema. They showed that heroes could be witty, flawed, self-deprecating. They weren't untouchable demigods, they were human, and that humanity was magnetic. Their films became cultural touchstones, endlessly rewatched, endlessly quoted. But beyond the art, they also set examples in life. Newman with his philanthropy, Redford with his commitment to independent cinema. Each in his own way proved that fame was a tool, not a prize. Their friendship wasn't about Hollywood gossip or publicity stunts. It was about building something meaningful. And perhaps that is why, even now, decades later, their story continues to inspire. Because in the end, it wasn't about fame at all. It was about friendship. The quiet years. As Redford aged, he retreated more and more to the quiet mountains of Utah. There, surrounded by pine forests, he painted, fished, and walked trails with his wife, Sybil. The frenzy of Hollywood was far behind him. But Newman was never far from his thoughts. Visitors often noticed framed photographs of the two together, reminders of a friendship that had defined much of his life. When asked why he never tried to replicate that partnership with another actor, Redford smiled. You can't recreate something like that. It just happens once. Even in solitude, Redford carried Newman with him. Their conversations, their laughter, their shared ideals all remained alive in memory. For Redford, memory itself became a kind of legacy. And legacy is the word that matters most, because both men left behind something greater than film reels. Legacy beyond the screen. Paul Newman's legacy lives in every bottle of salad dressing that funds a camp for children. It lives in the laughter of sick kids riding horses, in scholarships given, in charities still thriving. His name means generosity as much as it means artistry. Robert Redford's legacy lives in Sundance, in the hundreds of filmmakers who might never have had a chance without him. It lives in the films that challenged convention, in stories that pushed boundaries, in the voices that found an audience. His name means independence as much as it means stardom. Together, their legacies form a mirror, one giving back through charity, the other giving back through art, both reminding us that greatness is not about what you take, but what you leave. Which brings us back to the man now speaking at 89, looking back over the decades with gratitude. Gratitude. At 89, Robert Redford is not interested in myth-making. He is interested in truth. And the truth, he says, is that Paul Newman made his life richer. They were two very different men, one extroverted, one reserved, one older, one younger. But those differences never divided them. If anything, they created balance. He had my back, and I had his, Redford admitted. When he speaks of Newman now, his tone is tender. He remembers Newman's humility, his laughter, his ability to cut through pretense. He remembers the days in Mexico shooting Butch Cassidy when the heat was unbearable, but the camaraderie made it bearable. He remembers the long shoots of The Sting, where the hours were grueling, but Newman's jokes kept spirits high. He remembers not the fame, but the friendship. And he wants the world to remember that too. Because in the end, that is the final truth. That the greatest story wasn't in the films, but in the bond behind them. Robert Redford and Paul Newman were Hollywood royalty, but their greatest achievement wasn't box office numbers or Oscar statues. It was friendship, honest, enduring, and unshakable. At 89, Redford has finally spoken, and his words ring with wisdom. Success is not fame, but kindness. Not wealth, but legacy. Not glory, but the people you walk beside. Paul Newman is gone, but Robert Redford's tribute ensures that their story remains immortal. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because the best stories aren't just told, they're remembered.